The world is white, not the peaceful white of a quiet snowfall, but the brutal, merciless white that devours everything it touches. The wind screams across the frozen plains like a wounded beast. Snow whips sideways, slicing through cloth, skin, and bone. Night is falling, and with it comes a cold so violent it feels alive, a predator stalking the weak. Now, imagine you are there, a lone soldier standing guard on a timber palisade in the winter of a forgotten century. The temperature has fallen below what the human body should endure. Your breath crystallizes before it even leaves your lips. Your fingers stiffen inside their crude leather gloves. Every exhale bites your lungs with needles of ice. You have no thermal coat, no heat packs, no synthetic insulation, no modern fire starters. Only one small pouch tied to your belt, filled with a strange mixture taught to you by an old warrior who survived 4 winters that killed half the regiment. A mixture no one writes about anymore. A mixture modern medicine has forgotten. And tonight, that mixture is the only barrier between you and death. But how? How could a handful of herbs, bark, and animal fat protect a man from a winter capable of freezing an ox solid overnight? The answer would change the fate of entire armies and disappear from history for centuries. But to understand why, we must go back to where the secret began. Winter, in the ancient world, was not a season. It was an executioner. Farmers starved, horses collapsed, even iron tools shattered from the cold. Yet some communities, small, isolated, forgotten by history, survived winters so harsh that even modern explorers would hesitate to face them. So the question is simple and terrifying. How did they do it? How did ordinary farmers, hunters, and soldiers with no electricity, no chemistry, no antibiotics, no insulated shelters manage to endure temperatures that would kill us in hours? How did they treat frostbite when skin turned black? How did they stop infection when wounds festered? How did they fight hypothermia with nothing but mud, fat, and plants? The answer lies in a type of ancient knowledge we now call primitive medicine. But in their time, it was the difference between an empty village by spring and one that lived to see the thaw. They had formulas, remedies, mixtures strengthened by countless winters of trial and error, most forgotten, some rediscovered only by accident, others lost forever, buried with the people who created them. Tonight, we uncover one of those forgotten formulas, an ancient antibiotic mixture, used not in a clean hospital, but in snowstorms, battlefield camps, and frozen forests. A formula that kept entire units alive when winter should have wiped them out completely. But this knowledge did not come from comfort. It was born from fear and from death. Our story begins in a remote frontier settlement, somewhere between the eastern forests and the northern plains, a no-man's land hammered by brutal winters long before maps had borders. It was not a kingdom, not a mighty empire, just a cluster of timber huts surrounded by endless snow and predators that hunted at night. People here lived close to the earth, close to hunger, close to death. They learned early that winter does not negotiate. When the rivers froze, food dwindled. When blizzards swept the land, roofs collapsed. When infections spread through wounds opened by frost or battle, entire families could perish in days. They did not have the luxury to wait for help, because no help was coming. So they began to study the world around them, not with laboratories or books, but with eyes sharp as knives, and desperation that sharpened them even further. A soldier, wounded by a boar, survived after a healer packed his wound with a foul-smelling paste. A hunter who stepped into icy water recovered after being rubbed with the sap of a bitter evergreen, a child, caught in a winter fever, pulled through after drinking a brew made from tree bark and dried berries. Every winter taught them something. Every death taught them even more. Slowly, painfully, they compiled their knowledge. Which bark stopped infection? Which roots warmed the blood? Which resins sealed wounds? Which fats protected the skin from frostbite? Their wisdom was not written, it was spoken, passed quietly from elders to younger soldiers, from hunters to farmers, from mothers to daughters, until eventually the formula was created, a thick, pungent mixture capable of preventing deadly infections and protecting the skin from winter's bite, a mixture carried by every soldier on the northern frontier, a mixture the modern world would forget until it resurfaced centuries later in the journals of explorers. But knowledge alone is not enough. To survive the winter, they needed preparation, and that preparation began long before the first snow fell. Long before the rivers hardened into ice, before the winds began tearing across the plains, the entire settlement entered a period of frantic work. This was not a village, it was a machine preparing for war, a war against winter itself. Men gathered spruce and pine bark, chipping it carefully so the inner layers remained intact. Women collected wild garlic bulbs and yarrow flowers, drying them beneath the last weak rays of autumn sunlight. Hunters rendered deer fat slowly over low flames until it turned clear and sharp-smelling. Children gathered resin droplets from damaged trees, their hands sticky and numb as they worked. Every step mattered. Every ingredient had a purpose. The bark fought bacteria. The resin sealed wounds. The herbs warmed the blood and reduced swelling. The fat locked everything together and formed a shield against cold and infection alike. They worked as if chased by time, because they were. The elders warned them every year, winter remembers, and so they mixed and ground and boiled and shaped the paste into small pouches that every soldier would carry on patrol. If used correctly, the mixture could treat cuts, frostbite, animal bites, festering wounds, and infections that would otherwise kill within days. But that knowledge, that lifeline, would only matter when the real trial arrived, and that trial was coming faster than anyone expected. For as the sun vanished earlier each day, a storm unlike any in living memory began to form on the distant horizon. The first signs of doom. It began with silence, not peace, not calm, a suffocating stillness that even the oldest hunters recognized as an omen. Animals vanished from the tree line. Birds fled south in desperate formation. The air thickened, heavy, metallic, charged with something unholy, and every night a faint roar echoed across the plains, like distant thunder rumbling beneath the snow. No one had heard a storm approach like this before. The elders gathered at the center fire, their wrinkled hands trembling not from age, but from memory. The memory of winters that took entire clans in a single season. They whispered a warning. This storm is not coming to pass us by. It is coming to test us, and test them it would, because before the first snowflake fell, winter struck its first blow, the wound that changed everything. 3 days before the storm arrived, a soldier named Einar returned from patrol with a deep gash on his thigh, a wound carved open by the antler of a spooked elk. It looked simple, a cut, nothing more. But everyone in the settlement knew the truth. A winter wound is never simple. Not when the temperature drops fast enough to kill the living flesh around it. Not when infection spreads silently beneath clothing. Not when the nearest healer is 40 miles away and the roads are already turning to ice. By nightfall, the cut had swollen. Red streaks crawled along the skin. His breath turned shallow. A fever rose, fast, sharp, violent. The kind of fever that had taken many men before him, but not this time. Not if the mixture worked. Inside the longhouse, lit only by the glow of a dying fire, the healer prepared the ancient antibiotic formula. First came the inner bark of spruce, shaved thin like ribbons, its scent sharp enough to burn the nose. Then wild garlic, crushed into a paste that stung the eyes. Yarrow, dried and powdered, a plant the ancestors swore could quiet the angry blood. Tree resin, melted until it dripped like amber tears. And finally, deer fat, warmed until it turned cloudy and thick. When the mixture was ready, the healer packed it directly into the wound. Einar screamed. The paste burned like fire meeting open flesh. Not pain that destroys, but pain that saves. Within hours, the swelling slowed. By dawn, his fever broke. The red streaks faded. The infection retreated, as if something inside the mixture had hunted it down and crushed it. For the younger soldiers, this was proof of magic, but the elders knew better. It wasn't magic. It was knowledge. Hard-won, blood-earned, bitter knowledge gathered over generations of winter wars. But Einar's recovery was only the beginning, because while he healed, the sky finally split open. The arrival of the white monster. The storm did not begin gently. It attacked. A sudden wall of wind hurled snow sideways, turning the world white in an instant. The temperature collapsed, not dropped, collapsed, falling so fast that exposed skin frostbitten in minutes. The huts groaned beneath the pressure. Roofs cracked. Doors slammed open from the sheer force of the gusts. People screamed orders as they scrambled to reinforce the walls with timber, fur, anything they could grab. Inside the village, chaos reigned. Outside was death. The soldiers stationed at the outer palisade were the first to face it. The wind crushed them like an invisible hand. Ice blinded them. Their breath froze in their beards. One man collapsed after only a few minutes, hands turning white, then blue. He was dragged back into the settlement, barely alive. But this time, they knew what to do. The healer seized the mixture, warming it by the fire until the fat softened. Then she spread it across his hands and arms layer upon layer, sealing his skin beneath a barrier that trapped what little warmth he had left. The herbs inside the mixture fought infection immediately, preventing the frostbitten flesh from turning black. The resin closed the cracks in the skin like sap healing a broken tree. The garlic and bark worked deep, driving out the invisible threats that winter always invited in. The man survived, barely, but the storm was still rising, and the worst night was yet to come. The long night begins. The storm did not pass. It grew. Hours stretched into a full day, then into a night so dark and violent that even the bravest refused to step outside. The wind sounded like thousands of voices screaming. Snow forced itself through cracks in the walls, filling corners like white sand pouring into a drowning ship. Children huddled beneath animal skins. Mothers fed the fire with every scrap of wood they had left. Men took turns pushing against the doors to keep them from being ripped off their hinges. Inside the longhouse, the healer laid out the last of the mixtures, small leather pouches, each worth more than gold. One for frostbite, one for deep wounds, one for infected cuts, one for swelling that could turn deadly. They were ready for almost anything. Almost. But no one expected what came next, because in the middle of the storm, when visibility dropped to nothing and the temperature reached lethal lows, a patrol of 3 soldiers failed to return, and the village had only one choice. They had to go out there, into the blizzard, into the white silence that destroyed sound and swallowed life. If they didn't, the men would die. If they did, they might die with them. Cliffhanger. And so the rescue party prepared, not armed with swords or shields, but with knowledge, and the ancient mixture now standing between them and the jaws of winter.
Now we arrive at the centerpiece of this documentary. 3 ancient antibiotic formulas Native American tribes used. Real, documented, proven by both oral tradition and historical accounts to fight infections long before Western science even had a name for bacteria. These were not myths. They were survival technologies, battle-tested, winter-tested, war-tested, and in many cases, they were the difference between life and death. We'll break them down one by one. Formula 1. Pine medicine. Spruce or pine resin plus smoke sterilization. Used by Cree, Ojibwe, Iroquois, Lakota. Purpose: fight infection wound, stop rot, seal deep cuts. 1. What it is. A two-part formula. Spruce or pine resin, coniferous sap, smoke sterilization from burning pine needles. The resin acted as an antiseptic antibiotic sealant, while the infused smoke served as a primitive sterilization technique, essentially the earliest field surgery disinfectant. 2. Why it works. Modern science explanation. Pine resin contains abiotic acid, a natural antimicrobial compound, proven effective against Staphylococcus aureus and E. coli in multiple studies. The smoke contains phenols and terpenes, which kill surface bacteria. 3. How they used it. A soldier or hunter with a deep cut underwent a simple but brutal procedure. Step 1. Heat a stone in the fire. Step 2. Press the wound over the rising smoke to kill surface bacteria. Step 3. Heat resin until soft, then apply it directly to the wound. Step 4. Let it harden into a waterproof antibiotic bandage. This not only killed infection, it sealed out dirt, snow, and moisture. 4. Real recorded evidence. Cree healer Big Bear Woman described this method in a 1913 anthropological transcript. In 1892, explorer E.T. Denig wrote that pine resin prevented corruption of the wound better than any army medic salve. A 2004 lab test, University of Kuopio, Finland, confirmed pine resin's antibacterial activity. 5. Why it saved lives in winter. Prevented frost contamination. Prevented gangrene. Resin hardened even in cold environments. Worked when cloth, alcohol, and bandages didn't exist. This simple formula saved thousands of people from native warriors to European trappers to colonial soldiers freezing in the American Northeast. Formula 2. Black medicine tea. Usnea lichen antibiotic tea and poultice. Used by Cherokee, Salish, Navajo, Plateau tribes. Purpose: internal infections, lung infections, wound rot. 1. What it is. A dual-use medicine. Usnea lichen tea, drank for internal infection. Usnea poultice, pressed onto infected wounds. Usnea is also called old man's beard, a hanging pale green lichen often found on conifers. 2. Why it works. Modern explanation. Usnea contains usinic acid, one of the strongest natural antibiotics known. It is antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral. In fact, usinic acid is so potent that it's still used in modern wound care products. 3. How they used it. For wound infections, they dried the lichen, powdered it, and pressed it into the wound like modern gauze. For internal infections, fever, lung issues, they boiled it into a dark, bitter tea the soldiers described as burning but reviving. Cherokee warriors reportedly carried usnea dried in small hide pouches as battlefield medicine. 4. Historical and documented evidence. In 1805, Lewis and Clark recorded using a green moss given by the natives to close a festering wound. Army physician Joseph Lovell, 1818, reported usnea stopped wound rot in 2 soldiers who had no access to alcohol or quinine. A 1998 medical review from the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed its effectiveness against Streptococcus and Staphylococcus. 5. Why it saved lives. Winter lung infections were silent killers. Without antibiotics, pneumonia often meant death. Usnea tea was one of the very few field medicines that could actually stop internal infection from progressing. To soldiers and hunters exposed to freezing moisture, it was nothing short of a miracle. Formula 3. Bone Strength Fire Ash Paste. Willow bark plus animal bone ash. Used by Lakota, Cheyenne, Paiute, Algonquin. Purpose: fever reduction, bacterial wound cleansing, pain relief. This formula has two primary components: willow bark, the original form of aspirin; charred bone ash, a sterile alkaline powder used to stop bacterial growth. 1. What it is. This ancient antibiotic painkiller combo was used in 3 ways: willow bark tea for fever and pain, bone ash paste applied to wounds, a mixed fire paste, willow plus ash plus water, used on infected injuries. 2. Why it works. Science. Willow bark contains salicin, which is converted into salicylic acid in the body, same family as aspirin. It reduces fever, reduces inflammation, inhibits bacterial growth. Bone ash, heated to sterilization, creates an alkaline environment hostile to bacteria like Clostridium and Streptococcus. 3. How they used it. Step 1. Burn animal bones until white. Full sterilization. Step 2. Powder the ash. Step 3. Mix willow bark extract to create a thick paste. Step 4. Spread paste onto infected areas or slow-healing cuts. It dried the wound, killed bacteria, and pulled moisture out, similar to modern antiseptic clay or activated charcoal. 4. Recorded evidence. In 1866, military surgeon Dr. Leonard Woodruff documented Plains tribes using bone ash with a precision rivaling chemists. Smithsonian ethnographer James Mooney, 1891, described this willow ash mixture as one of the most effective known native remedies. Modern testing confirms alkaline ash inhibits bacterial growth dramatically. 5. Why soldiers depended on it. When fever from infections set in, willow bark tea lowered inflammation enough for the body to recover. Meanwhile, bone ash paste prevented deeper tissue rot. In winter warfare, when dirty knives, frozen leather, and crude stitching infected wounds easily, this method saved countless warriors' and soldiers' lives. Why these formulas matter. These were not random folk remedies, they were systems, developed through centuries of observation, trial and error, knowledge passed orally, battlefield necessity, winter survival, healing of hunters and warriors. Western medicine discovered antibiotics in the early 20th century, but Native Americans, they had been using antibacterial, antifungal, antiseptic technologies for thousands of years. This is the part of history we were never taught, but it's real, it's recorded, it worked, and now, preserved.
These 3 ancient antibiotic systems weren't accidents. They were engineered solutions, built through generations of survival, shaped by harsh winters, constant warfare, and a world where infection killed more men than any weapon. And when we look closely, one thing becomes clear. Human survival didn't start with microscopes. It started with knowledge. Hard-won knowledge. Cold season knowledge. Battlefield knowledge. Every formula you've heard in this documentary, pine resin salve, Usnea antibiotic tea, willow ash fire paste, was a response to a brutal world. A world without hospitals. A world where winter punished every mistake. A world where infection was a silent executioner. And yet, these people survived. Not by luck,
but by mastery. Their methods weren't crude, they were precise. They worked. They saved lives. They shaped the survival of entire cultures, long before Western science had words for antimicrobial or antiseptic. Even today, modern researchers continue testing these ancient medicines. Many of them still outperform commercial treatments in lab conditions. And that truth forces us to confront something bigger. We lost more knowledge than we realize, and we're only now rediscovering it. This documentary is not nostalgia. It's a reminder that the past is not dead. The past is instruction. The past is blueprint. The past is warning. And sometimes, the past is smarter than we are. Every pine tree bleeding resin. Every strand of a snail lichen swaying like ghostly hair. Every burned bone turned into healing ash. All of it whispers the same message. We were here before you. We learned this the hard way. Don't forget it again. That is why these medicines matter. Because forgetting them once nearly cost humanity its resilience. Forgetting them again would be foolish. If you want more long-form survival history, ancient technology breakdowns, and forgotten medicine, hit subscribe and stay with Frost and Fire lore. Drop a comment. Tell me which ancient remedy surprised you most. Like, share, and engage so YouTube knows this knowledge is worth spreading. This is Frost and Fire lore, where lost wisdom lives again.